10x your service design offering with Snapply. Take 20% off any order with This Is HCD 20 off. Let's superpower you and your design team's potential. Sign up at snapply.app. Enjoy the episode from your friends at Snapply, helping support This Is HCD podcast.
Welcome to Worldwide Waste, a podcast about how digital is killing the planet and what to do about it. Jared Spool is a huge inspiration for me. I struggle to think of anyone I have learned more from over the years about how to do digital design well. Jared is a prolific writer, researcher, speaker and educator. He is super witty and always thought-provoking. He is the founding principal of User Interface Engineering, a research, training and consulting firm that specialises in website and product usability. He's full of ideas here about how to design within a digital world that gives the impression of having no constraints. He talks about the need for new tools and thinking when it comes to making sure we create designs with the best possible Earth experience.
I guess as humans, we've always had this perspective that these resources are infinite. And, you know, it's a natural thing to just feel like, well, the things seem to go beyond the horizon, so it must infinitely go beyond the horizon. And the idea that we have constrained resources, I mean, that type of thinking goes back, 50, 60 years where, we started to think about, well, actually it's a closed system and we only have so much and we can only use so much. And as a result, the system itself is problematic in that we will run out of things and we will consume them and in our case we will convert them into things that are toxic and suddenly there's concern, but part of the problem is that it's not an immediate crisis. And so we can keep kicking that can down the road and let, our children deal with it or our grandchildren deal with it. And some people are smart enough to say that's not acceptable. But the reality is that this is something that is not infinite. We can't keep just going down and saying, I know, but I really do like my animated GIFs.
Yeah. And even people, what I find, Jared, is that people who will be very conscious and say, like, I try and lead, a green life. That's it. I'm conscious. Might even bring my mug, to when I used to go to the coffee shops and stuff like that. And I separate my rubbish and I'm conscious of using less plastic. That, many of the people in this profession, in UX are a kind of, they're more on the green side. They're more in that argumentative space that you described of people being, and because younger people are more aware of these problems, that it's their future that's been gambled away, so to speak, or being consumed away. So there's many people that have a rising consciousness of how they interact with the physical world. When they come to digital, they seem to think there are no consequences of, having, these animated GIFs or these huge images or these, of transferring down massive quantities of JavaScript when you only need 10% of it, or, it's funny, or do you find that the people that we deal with are often the green people in the physical space, but when it comes to digital, I want my big screen and I want to change my phone every 2 years, that we haven't a kind of the penny hasn't dropped, so to speak, that everything in digital has an energy cost.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think people, it's funny. We have this family of rabbits that lives in our yard.
So have we.
and the rabbits have this habit. If they're afraid of you, if they see you and they're afraid of you, they'll turn around. They won't run away. They'll just turn around. And it's as if they can't see you now, you must be gone. And I think that humans have this same thing too. I mean, if I put my phone into the rubbish, or I put it even in recycling, it's gone. I don't know what happens to it. I don't know the downstream effects. I don't know what the toxicity of the materials are. I don't know any of that stuff. As far as I'm concerned, problem solved. I took it and I put it away. And the same is true on the supply chain, right? It's I don't know what resources go into making my phone. I don't know what things have to be mined and what toxicity of that mining takes for the materials on the phone. I don't know what chemicals are leached into the groundwater because of the acids that are used to make the parts of my phone. I don't know any of that. So, phone comes to me, I use it, I throw it out. And I'm basically not seeing any of this. And I think that's to some extent that's a design problem, right? The people who make these things, even Apple, which seems to Tim Cook seems to be concerned about the environment, seems to want to have this. They have made a big deal about the recyclability of their materials, and they have this program where if you bring dead devices to them, they will take them and in some cases give you cash back for them. And they will definitely, as far as I understand it, recycle responsibly, but I don't really know. Right? It's still, I get a phone. I don't know how it was made. I get I deliver my phone back to Apple. I don't know what they do with it. And all those sort of second order effects and beyond are invisible to me. And when things are invisible that I should know about, that should change my behavior, that's a design problem, right? That's a difficult design problem, and it's what we would call an ecosystem scale problem, right? There you can look at the world of design. Let's say digital design, because it's the world I live in, right? You can look at it sort of like levels of a zoom of a camera. There was this great video. I'm sure you've seen it. If you Google it, you can find it. It was created by Ray and Charles Eames in the 60s. It's called Powers of 10. And if you just Google Eames, Eames, Powers of 10, you will find this thing. And it's a simple little 7-minute movie, and it was created for some reason for IBM in the 60s, and it starts with this couple having a picnic in a park, and the narrator explains that the camera is a meter, shows an area, a square on the picnic of a meter on each side, and you see the couple having their little picnic, and then the camera zooms out, so now that same square is represents 10 meters on a side. And you can see that the couple, who is much smaller, is in a fairly large park. And then the camera zooms out again to 100 meters. And now what you can see is you can't really see the couple anymore. They're just a dot in the center, but you can see that the park is actually part of a marina, and it keeps zooming out. You find out that the marina is in Chicago, and then it zooms out to 10,000 meters, and you can see the whole Great Lakes area, and it zooms out again to 100,000 meters, and it keeps doing this. And eventually you see, the planet, and then the solar system, and where the solar system is in the universe. And so it keeps doing that. And then it zooms back to the couple, and then it zooms in to 10 to the minus 14. And you get to see skin cells and molecules and atoms. And it basically shows that every time you zoom in, you see something different. And we can think of design this way, right? So, when I first started in design, we were focused on screens and just getting the information on a screen to make sense to somebody who was using it. And that took a lot of work. And then we zoomed out and we're like, okay, well, what happens when we have multiple screens in an application? So now we have to not just make sure that every screen makes sense, but we now have to make sure that the flow from one part of the application to the other makes sense. Or if we're building a website, that the website as a whole makes sense. And then if we zoom out again, we start to look, okay, well, what if we have multiple applications or multiple websites or some combination thereof? And we get into what people refer to as service design, right? And what we're looking here is we're looking at the interrelationship of different digital things and the non-digital things that happen in between. So we can think of this as bigger experience design. But if we zoom out one more time, we end up looking at multiple systems of apps and non-apps and digital and non-digital. And we get into ecosystems. And the ecosystem is something that from the design perspective, we don't know a lot about. We know how to design for screens. We know how to design for multiple screens and apps and websites. We know how to design for multiple apps in experiences, but we don't know how to deal with multiple experiences that are run by different organizations that have no central source of governance, that there is no single decision maker who says, this is the experience I want our customers or our users to have. So we've got all these different organizations, and because we're dealing with that, we don't really know how to design in that space, and we don't know how to render our intention. We don't know how to make things clear and concise, and have people behave in the way that's best for everybody involved. And that's where I think you've gotten to, is this. There are these problems. And one of the interesting things that when I started thinking about this and thinking about my history in design is that when we were just focused on screens, we were completely unaware of the problems of applications and websites. We were not thinking of the problems that happen when we're trying to get multiple screens to work together. It wasn't until we solved most of the problems with screens that we could even see those problems. They were invisible to us, like the rabbit turning their back. They were invisible to us, and we couldn't see them. And then when we were working on our apps and we were getting the apps to flow right, we had a set of problems that had to do with, well, what happens if we have multiple apps that the same user has to use, or they have to switch between the app and the website, or they have to deal with customer support, or go into the store and then work and find the same item, in their digital interface. We couldn't see those problems until we'd solved the problems of just getting an app to work together. And because our focus was just at that smaller Zoom level. And it's only now that we're seeing these bigger problems that, hey, the choices we make for an image size actually affects our planet. We could not see that before. And we don't have any tools to deal with that. We don't have any techniques. We don't know what we're supposed to do. We don't even know how to really detect or measure the problem, right? Can I tell how much energy my image will use? Those tools are very crude right now, at best. And so I can't even weigh my options and make a decision that says, well, the data shows me that going down alternative 3 is better than alternatives 1, 2, and 4. So even if I have the intention to do the right thing, I don't have any way to tell whether I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah, it's it's early days in the space. Like we're carrying out this over audio. So we could have done it, say, over video, over Zoom or whatever, but it would have been 30 times more energy intensive. Maybe, obviously lots of benefits in that, but it's a podcast and it's going to turn out as a podcast.
Right. But, and I have the face for podcasting, so it works out good.
The same here, I was thinking about those things like that. And it's only in the last year, 18 months that even I, began to think about these ideas that, that the amount of weight of an hour of audio is 30 times less than a fairly high definition bit of video that would occur. And that whatever that number is, and they say, oh, but it's not a lot of energy, is it? And proportionately, it isn't, a huge. Certainly, there's much more energy consumed by driving a car or taking a plane. But if you've got a choice to do something that is 30 times less polluting, shouldn't we take that choice if we're not losing anything else, in the process? And sometimes we're even gaining, because I've seen these studies about how a lot of people feel more stressed in Zoom meetings than in normal meetings. That there's a whole sense of attention that, because in a physical meeting you've got all these natural senses coming at you that you're used to dealing with. You can kind of feel the mood in the room, so to speak, all these things that you kind of don't have to think about because millions of years we've been doing these things. When you're on a Zoom call, you have to be paying a lot more attention, or parts of your brain are working a lot harder to understand the mood in the room, so to speak, or the mood that the person that you're talking to. So a lot of people are showing a lot of stress, and that one of the ways of getting rid of the stress, or at least reducing it, would be actually sometimes, moving to audio. People are more comfortable with phone calls, because they're used to them for longer periods. But just thinking about these issues, that sometimes the lesser digital option can be good for everyone. It's not, the high max resolution is not always the best option. Like, it's not always the Rolls Royce option. We just feel it culturally or techie wise that if we maximize things, that by definition must be the maximum experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? One of my favorite, I don't know if you call them a cartoon or a comic, but whatever it is XKCD, right? XKCD.com. And he draws these really intelligent scenes completely with stick figures and line art. There's no definition to any of the things that he is drawing or describing. And this is fascinating to me, right? Because all the communication that's necessary is done in this incredibly low bandwidth artwork. And the energy it takes for him to draw it and the energy it takes for me to absorb it and understand it is certainly not more than if I'd had something high resolution, and it's probably a lot less. And we haven't done a good job of helping people understand that sometimes simpler is actually more effective, not just in its energy consumption in terms of, electricity and resources and things like that, but in its energy consumption in terms of comprehension and communication and the human energy that we have to expound. And I wonder if there's a relationship to the simpler the communication, the easier it is on the world that we live in.
Yeah, I think that, the comic or cartoon that you're talking about, I definitely remember reading about these issues in design years ago about how you either stayed simple or you had to go the whole hog in drawing a face. You had to, you either stayed quite light, but if you went reasonably good, people hated it, but if you did the light outlines, then humans seemingly had this capacity to fill in the details. But if you filled in some of the details, you didn't, people felt it was less lifelike in some ways. Like,
you're referring to something which people call the uncanny valley, which is there's this point where the more lifelike you make it, the worse it gets. And then it transitions, right? Then suddenly it becomes better, but 90% of the way is much worse than 80% of the way. And so you see this in animated graphics and things like that. And that is very true. And I do remember working in computer graphics in the early days and just seeing all of the energy that was being used to render a single frame, of which there's 24 frames in a minute. And so if you have a 90-minute full-length movie, you're rendering thousands of frames. What is it? 2,160 frames. I'm sorry, it's 24 frames in a second, not 24 frames in a minute. So I got to multiply that number times 60 again, and so that brings us to 129,000 frames to make a 90-minute film. And if each frame, when I was starting computer graphics, a frame could take a rendering engine, which was this massive supercomputer quality machine. It could take it 60 or 80 minutes to do, right? So you're burning all this supercomputer technology for just 1/100,000th of the video. And that energy, the amount of energy that Pixar puts into a movie, for example, is just incredible. And they're great movies, there's no doubt about it, but that's a heavy cost. And where's that cost get calculated? Whose balance sheet does it show up on? Does it show up on Pixar's? Probably not. And it's, I don't know, it's a difficult situation.
It's a difficult, and say you look at Pixar, great. But if that's a great film, it's a great film, and you can say it's a trade-off. There's an energy trade-off, but But what I finding when I was doing the research for the book was statistics like that would say that 90% of data is never accessed 3 months after it's created. That we're creating tremendous quantities of waste in the digital landscape that has no use. Like the Pixar movie brings entertainment and joy, and I know that Netflix had to throttle their bandwidth by about 25% during the pandemic because there were consequences of stresses on the electrical network and other networks, etc. in the environment. But that at least you can say, well, that's entertainment, and humans need entertainment. But it seems that in digital we produce enormous. For every one good thing we do 9 absolutely useless things. That this sense of extraordinary frivolity or lack of care, that you've got 9 pieces of bread or 10 pieces of bread on the table and you eat one of them and you just let the rest of them go off because you don't care. There seems in this whole digital landscape that lacking in constraints, we so lack the consciousness. We'll create 40 different wireframes and we'll store them, and we'll edit the image 100 times and we'll have 99 saved versions of that edited image, and we don't even think about, and that'll all go up into the cloud, and and it's getting worse because if you store on a hard disk versus you store in the cloud, it's about 3,000 times more energy intensive to store in the cloud than to store in a hard disk. So it's like we're exponentially getting more wasteful. Like digital is just exploding in its lazy consumption and frivolous consumption of energy.
Yeah, you remind me of a project we worked on back in the early 2000s. Where we were working with the team at Microsoft on Microsoft.com on the developer network, right? So this is all the material that's created for developers, and we were working on some of the early content strategy stuff there, and they did an inventory of the content that was sitting on their servers waiting for people outside Microsoft to request it. And they found at this point, they'd had millions of pages, but they found that they had 800,000 pages that had never been requested once by anybody. They'd never, even the robots didn't go and walk through it to find links, right? It was just content that was sitting there that nobody had ever accessed. How to connect an Excel spreadsheet to a database that lives on a UNIVAC 1011 or some other wacky documentation. And no one had ever asked for this. And so all of that was waste. There was waste in its creation. There was waste in its storage. There was waste in us having to find it and figure out what to do with it. All of it.
Totally. And, but there's the culture, I think the culture of production. Now, interestingly, I've heard, I'm not sure if it's absolutely true, but that Microsoft have really tried to change their culture, and it can take years. That historically it was like, I remember talking, I've done a lot of work with Microsoft over the years as well, and talking to technical writers in there and saying, Gerry, we agree with you, because I saying the same things you're saying about the 800,000 pages and stuff like that, and I was discovering similar type of stuff. And they're saying, but like if I go to my boss on Friday, and she asked me, what did I do on Friday? This technical writer said to me, and I say, well, I deleted 600 pages. she'll maybe smile and look at me and she'll say, but what did you do? In other words, what did you create? Like
right.
the fact that you've deleted 600 pages, well, that's nice to know, but what work did you do? And seemingly from what I hear within Microsoft, they've changed that model of how they actually do their individual performance reviews. And they've now created 3 elements of the review, each getting equal weight or equal part of your bonus or your career move. And the first third is, well, what did you do in the last 6 months? What did you create? We'd like to hear about that and tell us what you did. But the second third of the review is, what did you reuse? So what did you go out and find and discover and reuse? And did you? Oh, I found this sign up or this form or whatever, this gizmo that John Smith had created, and I integrated it into the e-commerce flow. Oh, that's what they're looking for, the reuse of things, right, that have already been created. And the third part of the bonus or the individual performance is, what did you share? So what of what you created has been reused, or what evidence have you got of the stuff that you've created that it was actually useful? And I think that somehow, to me, that's constantly in my mind, that if we can change the model of how we reward, or how we, like I was talking to people in Google, and I say, years ago, they were saying, oh, Google's just becoming like every other organization. It's launch and leave. You want your career to progress in Google, you launch a project. Doesn't matter whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. You launch a product and then you leave the position and move up the chain before it collapses or whatever. And that, Google's just like 90% of other organizations, where we reward the production of things. And I think if we could somehow change the culture of, it's not just about the production of things. You're not a great fella if you've produced all this stuff. You're actually a great person, a great woman if you've reused stuff. Like that's clever to reuse, and it's clever to share. Because I think you put your finger on it near the beginning, that this is human. Like, I grew up on a farm, a small little farm in Ireland, and everybody, judged everybody else by how many acres you had, and how many sheep you had, and how many cattle you had, and the more cows you had, and the more sheep you had, the better you were. So, I mean, if we got an opportunity to have more land, we'd always take it. And a kind of land is like gigabits. A gigabit is like an acre of land. And who's going to refuse another acre of land? So we've got this, even though we may look cool and have got, great haircuts and fancy shoes and say all the right words, we seem to still behave like we're small farmers desperately trying to have more sheep and more acres.
Yeah. You're right. We, as a culture, we measure, we talk about things in terms of creation of wealth, creation of value. And the word creation is just thrown around. It is not, we don't ask the question, how do we better utilize what we've already created? How do we make better choices, and how do we take advantage? And the real heroes shouldn't be the people who've invented something new. The real heroes should be people who took something old and repurposed it in a way that gets more value out of it. But you don't hear about that. That's not how people are rewarded in organizations. That's not how we hold up the shining stars of the world. We that's treated as if, well, someone would have figured that out. It's inevitable. It's not like, inventing a new type of uh, software or new type of product, or how do we use the things that already exist?
Yeah, and how do we, like, as you said, create? And who's the smartest? Who's the smartest in the room? Oh, the creative. It's the very act of creating is absolutely the genius. It's
Right.
not as you say, the person who added two and two together, or brought, like, I think many of the great geniuses have said, they weren't really creatives, they were connectors. The connector who brings things together, but we culturally reward those who create and produce. And I think in design, I don't know how we get this, because we need to address these problems. Because if you look at growth, and the concepts of growth, like if you look at in most natural systems grow for a certain period, and then they stop growing. They reach a stability, and they stay like that for most of their lives. And if growth continues, you call it cancer. In many ways, in a bodily living system, if too much growth occurs. And our growth, it seems, requires the death of the planet, the slow death of the planet. Like in every year, in the United States, is required 200,000 trees just for the packaging to deal with e-commerce returns. 200,000 trees just for e-commerce returns. And what has happened in digital, and this is something that really disturbed me, because I thought, I make it easy. Like we've made e-commerce returns so easy that people return 3 times as much as they used to when they were buying in physical stores. We make it so easy. We make things so easy that people are buying 5 times as much clothes, and they're wearing them half as long. And the quantity of clothes that's being dumped every year is extraordinary. And they did a study of UK teenagers there about 4 or 5 years ago, and they found that on average, there was 2 items in their closet that they'd never even worn. So we've created this easy culture that and how do we get out of? And I know I'm jumping around a bit, but one idea I had was around, let's say you're in the e-commerce flow, and you're the option of delivery, and the first delivery says one day. There's 2 options, and it's 1 day, and it's 3 day is the second one. So imagine we changed it from 1 day to green delivery, because if you deliver in 1 day, and certainly if you deliver in an hour, that's hugely more wasteful for all sorts of reasons. You need higher stock. There'll be more stress on the driver. They'll be driving faster, more congestion, more accidents. If you've got food, you'll have a lot more waste. All sorts of problems start kicking in when you speed up delivery. But if you said instead a 3-day delivery, you said green delivery, because that allows you to optimize.
Right. Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think that I mean, that reminds me of there was a switch that states made on driver's licenses, where they would give you the option to donate your organs, and they changed it from being opt-in to being opt-out. When you've applied for your license, instead of saying, yes, I'd like my organs to be delivered, you would say, actually, no, I'd prefer that my organs not be donated at the end and not be reused. And they found that there was this dramatic jump in people opting for organ donation when they were opting out, and that change is huge. And so what you're talking about makes a lot of sense, because you could give people the option to opt out of the more expensive, more difficult, and opt into something that is more effective for them. So something akin to not only do you give people this option for green, which communicates much more effectively the environmental benefits, but you make that the default. And they have to explicitly say, no, I want to not be green. I want to get the faster delivery.
Yeah, that would be another design advancement. You put green delivery first, and it's the box that's ticked, and they have to untick it a kind of in. But these sorts of, ideas or concepts of, have you seen anything like that of where, where there's some things that, and of course it goes against so much in e-commerce that doesn't want who's going to say, do you really need this product?
Well, I would point to Patagonia as an organization that has done this really well. I mean, they sell a product that is they sell products that are substantially more expensive than their competitors' products, and they don't sell them on features or benefits directly of the product. They sell them on Patagonia's commitment to protecting the environment. And they have a program, which I'm sure you're aware of, where they encourage people not to buy new jackets. They encourage people to send the jackets back to them, and they've created facilities all over the world to actually repair the jackets and send them back at a much cheaper cost than purchasing something new. And this is a really interesting tack, right? They have an opportunity to, if your zipper breaks, for you to go out and buy a new jacket, or if you punch a hole in the down, to go out and sell you a new jacket because you destroyed the old one. But instead, they're saying, no, send us back the jacket. We will patch it. We will fix the zipper. We'll do it at almost no cost to you. And what's fascinating about that is that forces them to rethink the materials they use, right? Because when they see all these repairs coming back, for which they have to hold the burden of the cost of repairing it, suddenly they're like, well, we could just engineer it better, we could design it better, and we can make it a better thing. They've gone to great lengths, and they're also very transparent in where they source their materials from and how the materials affect. They occasionally will discontinue something because there's no way to environmentally make it anymore. They're not happy with the environmental costs of it. So they have gone to this, and as a result, there's a whole audience of people who will pay the extra money to Patagonia to get products because of their commitment to making it. So one of the things in design that we can design for is this notion of meaning. People, if they understand how the decisions that they make are making the world better for other people, that's basically the definition of meaning, and I will buy something because it's somehow improving other people's lives, And this is one way to do that, is to look at the effects on the planet and the lives of everybody who lives on the planet, which, as far as I can tell, is all of humanity. Well, again, it's a communication thing. The perception of more has always been, it's sort of the cheap way for us to measure progress, right? We have more sheep, we have more land, we have more cars, we have more people who work for us. People measure things in terms of numbers, and we have more resolution, we have more LEDs in our television screen, we have more miles that we can travel, and it's this sort of natural, cheap, cheap way of being able to rank, of being able to put somebody on the top and somebody on the bottom and figure out our place in the world. And but it's not meaningful, right? How many letter E's did you read yesterday? Did I read more than you of the number of letter E's? I mean, that seems like a stupid thing to measure. But, measuring the number of cars I own or measuring the number of pixels in my TV, is that any better? What? And particularly, as you say, when we get beyond human perception to even discern the difference between a 4K TV and an 8K TV, what's the point? There are places where that difference is discernible, right? If I take an 8K image, if I take a 4K image and I blow it up to the size of a movie theater screen, I can start to see where the pixels are. So an 8K image actually allows me to not see that difference. So there is something discernible when we work at that scale. But 99% of the time, we're not viewing things at that type of resolution. And so there's a question. Why are we doing that? This conversation is reminding me of a project that was done by MIT in the 1980s and 90s by the Media Lab, where they felt like you were going to run into problems with resolution. They were actually worried about this space stuff, now that I think about it, and how much space it would take to store these higher resolution things, and came up with this different idea, which was, imagine a sports game, a football game. And one way to communicate the football game is to take these high resolution images and transmit them all over the world and store them and do all these things and all the energy costs that we're talking about. But what we're doing is we're basically snapping each frame of the game, 30 frames per second. We're snapping each frame, and we're storing it separately, and that's what costs us. But a football game is basically a field that doesn't change, and a bunch of players on the field that do change. So what if we just recorded each player once and then used computational effects to figure out what the changes are? And all we have to communicate is the change in the position and form of the player. Are they facing this direction? Have they raised their arm? Are they have they moved a meter to the left? We keep that and we transmit that. And it turns out the amount of energy and the amount of work to communicate those differences, once you calculate them, is cheaper. And so that was the thinking in the 80s and 90s. Fast forward to 2010, 2015, somewhere in there, where games like World of Warcraft, these massive games, are being played. And it turns out that that same technology is being used effectively because it was too expensive to render and transmit a graphic image for the game scene 30 times per second that has the players going through their motions. Instead, you used the local computers to do the rendering of this information, which is just this player has moved over here and has changed the position of their sword to swipe through this character. And it would just send these instructions to the local machine that would render it. The problem with that was that it didn't actually solve the energy problem, because instead of having a single rendering point, it has now hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of rendering points. Every user of World of Warcraft has to have a rendering engine, which is using all this energy to create the graphics at a resolution that feels, quote, realistic, unquote, that makes the gameplay interesting. And so you've actually made the problem worse. So there are these pros and cons to, we can create a lot of digital data, or we can create the lowest form and spend the time rendering it. That's problematic. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, but at least we're thinking about, what you framed is an energy conversation. Say, could you see yourself with your student? I don't know how the world is going to pan out or play out, but in center or whatever, that in the future or whenever you'd be teaching, you saying, well, okay, let's have a session on Earth experience or the environmental costs or the energy. Like, how do we get a AAA energy design here, guys and girls? How do we? We've AAA or quadruple A dishwashers. How do we get a quadruple A app and website? Come up with ideas about, we could. We don't need this amount of JavaScript going down every time, that we actually get at least part of the brain, part of the time of designers begins to go into the space of, how do I turn this into a AAA energy efficient design?
Yeah. I think the problem is that we don't have any tools for that. Right. It's really interesting now that you mention this, because we've only recently, say in the last 2 or 3 years, had tools where designers could measure the performance of their applications, where they could look at an application and say, how long does these parts of the application, how long does it take to render this image? How long does it take to download all the frameworks that I have? How long does it take to load this code? And what does that look like if I have a low bandwidth phone, or a connection that's pretty poor? Can I get something on the screen? And once we had the tools to measure it, all these incredible strategies like ghost screens, it's a technique, you've seen it 1,000 times, but you don't know you've seen it, where the application pretends to draw something that looks like the data, but it's just little gray boxes while it's waiting for the rest of the page to load. It allows it to actually load the application a little slower, giving the impression that progress is happening. And it's a perceived progress indicator. And but we only got to that point when we had the tools to measure. And what we're missing and what the challenge is can we create tools that say, I've got two design decision A and design decision B. Which one is better for the environment? Can I get an accurate assessment? And all the pieces of the environment, the creation, the rendering, the storage, the recycling, the deterioration effects, what are the total costs to the environment? I think that's where we need to focus, is in the tools to measure. Because if we have the tools to measure, then we can be making informed decisions. Until then, we're just sort of going on gut feel and anecdotal data and some mythology. I'm sure people believe that if you use one color in your image, it actually takes less storage or uses less energy than another color in your image. I mean, there's all this mythology that doesn't turn out to be true, but these things spread. After all, here we are the day after the president of the United States is suggesting that people ingest and inject disinfectants into their bodies to kill pandemic viruses. There's no science behind this, but unfortunately, now the president of Lysol has to put out a press release and hold a press conference saying, yeah, this would be a bad idea. Nobody should do this. That's the time we live in. And so we have mythology and misinformation floating around. How do we get some actual facts around energy consumption and environmental impact of the decisions we're making? And that's the key thing. But that only get us so far, because, for example, we have that for some climate change stuff and nobody's acting on it because, it's like, well, the world will suffer in 2050, which is still 30 years away. It's like, well, okay, that's 2050. That's not today. But the problem is, in 2050, we won't be able to undo the damage that we did today. So we need tools that not only measure, but explain that if we don't act today, we actually make things worse.
And like thinking about your Patagonian example, and I wonder what role design could play in making old things cool. That, oh, you got a jacket. Yeah, it was my father's jacket, or my brother handed it down to me. Oh, that's so cool. And look at all the patches on, it's a noteworthy thing. It's, rather than you're poor, you must have lost your job during the pandemic. It's a sign of sophistication.
Yes, no. I mean, what you're talking about is basically an aspect of culture, and culture does change slower than fashion. An aspect of culture which changes the reward system, right? Because what people react to are rewards, and if you get if people around you get raises and promotions because they've created new things, you're going to want to create new things. That's the reward that you get for success. So, when we are talking to teams about changing organizations, we start with, well, what are people rewarded for? If you want to design something better and the team is rewarded for shipping fast, well, shipping fast is inevitably going to game the system to produce worse design, because design takes time. Design requires that we slow down. And I think that's what you're talking about with things like the slow food movement, which is basically saying it's cool to go slow. When you say it's cool to go slow, what you're saying is you'll be socially rewarded for taking the longer route. So we have to focus on the reward system. We have to say, how are people rewarded? And to some extent, that's what things like the Paris Treaty was trying to do. It was trying to say, because there are anti-rewards, right? The opposite of a reward is a tax. So we can put taxes on expensive use, and we can reward you monetarily with the absence of the tax for more effective use. And if you do that, you will benefit better. We have to look at that reward system closer and design those rewards. And that's part of this sort of ecosystem, multi-organization design thing, where we don't have a lot of tools and we don't understand the design problems well. But if we can do that, we can make change.
And we'll finish now soon, but you've triggered just a final thought. So coming back, returns is bad, right? E-commerce returns is bad for everybody, even the consumer. It's a hassle to return stuff. It's as easy as you make it, and probably there's some guilt there that you're returning stuff as well. So imagine if a design manager says in an e-commerce environment, or says to you, hey, Jared, I want you to help us reduce. We've got a returns rate of 20%, right? And in physical stores, it's about 8% or so in typical. So I want to create something that works for everyone, but I believe that digital can help you make such a good decision, in the choice of the thing that you want to buy, that we would have a 4% return rate, because we would have such, and I don't know whether that's through personalization or whatever, but that shouldn't digital have, because of the knowledge and the data and the big data and stuff like that, have a capacity that helps people make even better decisions than they used to make in the physical store, because essentially a return is a failure of the sales rep, of the consumer, a return is not a good thing for anybody,
right,
in the environment. And can we say that, you're saying that, hey, young, people here, I need you to help me come up with a design that a side effect, maybe it's not the driving objective, but we're going to help the customer in such an extraordinary way choose the thing that is so right for them, that the return rate is going to be even lower than in physical stores. Imagine if we could do something like that in a design process. Everybody, the company would be more profitable. The customer would have a product that they totally love because they've no desire to return it, and it's a fantastic. And the earth would feel great because, not alone is returns take 200 million trees a year. Many of those return products end up in the dump. They can't be reused. So looking at that sort of do you think that could be a kind of, how would you bring design thinking to that problem?
Well, I think that's what you do. What you have to do is you have to set down the rule that you're not allowed to pass the cost of returns onto your customer, because you're just kicking that down the road. So if you're not passing the cost of return onto the customer, you have to bear the burden of the return. You have to pay, in essence, a tax for handling the return. You have to dispose of it, and you have to pay for that disposal, and you have to deal with it. And in my guess, what will happen, because that's to some extent what Patagonia, the CEO of Patagonia, did when he said, look, we're going to start owning returns and convincing people not to return our products. And he his approach was that we're going to use our innovation to do this. Where we've seen this work really effectively is in the automobile industry, of all places, because to be competitive automobiles back in the 80s started, the automobile manufacturers, at least in the United States, I don't know if they do this in Europe, but they do this in the United States, started offering free warranties for the first few years. This was a reaction of the American auto manufacturers. Chrysler did it first. They had like 3,000 miles or 3-year warranty. No, you will not pay for any repairs, and they will pay for all of it. And then General Motors came out and said, well, if you're doing this, we're going to go 4,000 miles in 4 years. And then Toyota came out and said, well, we're going to do 5,000 miles in 5 years. And they got in this bidding war over how long the warranties were and how long the number of miles that you were warranted for were. And what happened when they did that was the companies realized how much repairs were costing them. And they started engineering vehicles that needed less repair. And they were making vehicles that ran longer and didn't need to be replaced as often. And because they were running longer and they didn't need to replace, they could actually raise the price of the vehicle. And so they created this virtuous cycle by getting in competition with each other. And that's a reward system, right? And so if we could do something similar with returns and say, you don't have to pay for products that are returned, we will deal with that. And you create the burden on the company. They don't just pad their prices to deal with the returns. They actually have to pay a tax on returns. Then companies are going to go out of their way to not get returns. And part of that will be building better quality things that don't require returning.
If you're interested in these sorts of ideas, I've published a book called World Wide West. You can find out more at gerrymcgovern.com/www. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to be part of the conversational community, hop on over to thisishcd.com, where you can join the Slack community and help shape future episodes and connect with other designers around the world. Or join the HCD newsletter, where you can win books and get updates. Subscribe to our content on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And listen to any of our design podcasts, such as Getting Started in Design, Bringing Design Closer with Gerry Scullion, Prod Pod with Adrian Tan, and Ethnopod with Joe Hasbrook. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.